Ciekawy panel. Mam nadzieję, że jeszcze dużo osób do nas dotrze z udziałem gości z różnych państw. Zaraz zobaczymy. A ja chciałem przedstawić Państwu moderatora, pan Tomasz Kluszczyński, dyrektor ACESO, Healthcare Consulting Polska. A temat jest bardzo, bardzo ważny. Troska o pacjentów to troska o planetę. Dekarbonizacja ochrony zdrowia w Europie. Bardzo serdecznie prosimy.
Dziękuję pięknie za wprowadzenie.
Piękny temat i posłuchajmy.
Thank you so much. So this panel will be held in English for an obvious reason, as we have a very international panelists. Before we start, I would like to introduce you to our extraordinarily varied group representing pretty much all types of healthcare stakeholders. This is sort of at the core of this panel to make sure that we connect the dots from different angles and different agendas. Starting to my right, Natalia Ciobanu is a director at THINKT and also is a great proponent of both the circular economy as well as all things ESG, environment, society, and governance. And Natalia, we are very happy to have you. You're coming from Romania, so we will also be trying to get some perspective both from your country as well as big perspective across Europe. We're also extremely proud to have Jose Luis Castro, who is the Special Envoy Director General Special Envoy from WHO, covering respiratory diseases and, by that token, pollution. I'll stop here briefly because that is precisely the intersection of environment and healthcare that we will be exploring today. Sometimes a mystifying boundary for many, but in reality, a causal link between the environment and healthcare. We also have our local expert and local ambassador of ESG and circular economy, Agnieszka Schneck, director of Innovo. Probably doesn't need much introduction. Agnieszka works not only in Poland as an ambassador of green hospitals, but also at European level as an advisor to the European Commission. And following Agnieszka, we have David Kolarz, who represents the industry in the broadest possible sense. I believe it's probably easier to say that David represents more than industry because he also represents patients who are very much connected with his organization, which is called AIFP. It's an organization of innovative pharma companies. Joining us from Czechia, David Kolarz. Next person we have is Georgi Mesaros. I always get confused, the SZ being the opposite in Polish, but Georgi Mesaros is really going to have a pivotal role for this panel as he represents the patient voice, the patient perspective, again, working very internationally, but also working in Hungary, which is quite a challenging place to be when it comes to healthcare. And finally, Professor Zielonka, Professor Tadeusz Zielonka, again, probably needs no introduction in Poland, but for the benefit of this panel, it is now being streamed internationally. Professor Zielonka is a pulmonologist, is an internist. Professor Zielonka is also probably one of the very few outspoken proponents and ambassadors of ESG in healthcare, something that not many have done so far. So with this brief introduction, we will have our panel divided into two sections. So we'll have two rounds of questions. First, setting the stage, and then in the second part, we will try to explore potential solutions of how environmental, societal, and governance issues can be embedded in healthcare for the betterment of patients. Hence the title, Caring for Patients is Caring for the Planet. And I have stolen also a saying from Jose Luis Castro, climate action is also health action. And I think that leads me immediately to the first question. To Jose Luis Castro, the Special Envoy of WHO. Of course, WHO is very much invested in climate resilience and resilience of healthcare systems on the environmental stage. And on top of that, you also represent the respiratory diseases. That is a very unique set of diseases with extremely high disease burden globally. But also, these are the diseases that are clearly linked to environment. They're clearly linked to air pollution and tobacco smoking. Would you like to maybe give us a little bit of an insight into WHO's position of that resilience of healthcare systems, how that links to respiratory, and how you, as a special envoy, try to propose solutions to this particular aspect.
Sure. Thank you very much, Thomas, and thank you for inviting WHO to be part of this forum. I concluded my newsletter by saying that that climate action is also health action, because the effects of the climate are something that, as our Director General has observed, is happening now. It's not something that will happen in the future, and it's affecting people today. And the group of countries in the Central and Eastern Europe region are affected disproportionately the most year after year by the effects of climate change, especially on respiratory diseases. We are seeing also that these diseases are affecting children, and children, as you know, their lungs haven't been fully developed, so they will have a longer and more lasting damage, to their lungs by the effects of pollution. We're also seeing that the WHO quality, guidelines are clear. The safe limit for particles are 5 micrograms per cubic meters. And many Central and Eastern European cities face levels that are 4 to 5 times higher. Now, and just yesterday, the University of Chicago released the Air Quality Life Index, or AQLI, in which the data shows that air pollution is cutting years of life expectancy around the world. A stark reminder of what's at stake in this region and elsewhere. So if we have a message for policy makers, is one is to cut air pollution at the source. Phase out coal and dirty fuels, clean up transport and industry, and tackle also farm emissions. Align the national air quality standards with WHO guidelines, and also with the EU 2030 limits. I think these are all concrete steps that can be taken to address the issue. In the area of also heat, this region is experiencing, as you mentioned, a significant increase in heat, and having systems that alert the population, especially those who suffer from chronic respiratory diseases that are affected severely, is very important. But I think that when it comes to addressing these issues, there are policy initiatives, there are guidelines that countries can take the initiative to implement and also enforce effectively, so that it expands the benefit to the population. And I would like to finally say that the air quality, when we address air quality, we are addressing not only health, but we are addressing a big equity issue. The air that we breathe is not the same if you happen to live in a richer or better resource part of the world than one that hasn't. And all you have to do sometimes is drive a few miles to notice that difference. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. That was a very comprehensive answer. And I'm glad you also mentioned equity, because as you say, air pollution is a source of inequity. Those that are at risk, those vulnerable populations that are exposed to air pollution, actually that's a source of inequitable position in health versus health. And the paradox between healthcare contributing almost 5% of carbon emissions, therefore in a way causing the respiratory diseases, and conversely the respiratory diseases then contributing because of the gases, for instance, in inhalers. I'm sure we will explore this issue a little bit further in a second. And also I wanted to mention that beyond the global policies, we will also talk about the local solutions that are either at regulatory level or HTA level. We call it a green HTA. We also will be talking about green procurement, so how does that work in healthcare, green policy, and finally sustainability driven by patients, which we will get to when we speak to Kerry. So thank you so much, José Luis, for this insight. And I would like to also now ask Professor Zielonka. You represent a clinician, and as I said earlier, it's not common still in Central Eastern Europe for clinicians to be concerned about anything more than the clinical outcomes, medical outcomes for the patients. Therefore, the questions of environment, society, governance are not playing a major role either in the decision-making or in guideline creation or in the way that clinicians interact with other stakeholders. I would love you to maybe give us a little bit more of an insight and your position, because you are a very outspoken proponent and ambassador of climate change, air pollution, and how that works for respiratory diseases specifically.
Excuse me, I change language to Polish because I would like to propose more information during short time and more precise. Mam bardzo świeże badania, które pochodzą sprzed paru miesięcy, które oceniały świadomość śladu węglowego u studentów medycyny kończących studia w Warszawskim Uniwersytecie Medycznym. Co się okazało? Mamy świetną młodzież. Oni są bardzo proekologiczni. 80% dla nich ekologia to jest niezwykle ważna rzecz. Bardzo dobre wyniki. Proszę Państwa, sprawdziłem wiedzę na temat śladu węglowego leków. Praktycznie zerowa, od 2 do 4%. Czyli oni bardzo by chcieli być ekologiczni, ale oni kończąc studia nie dostali żadnej wiedzy na ten temat. I my mamy wielkie zadanie, ponieważ my startujemy nie z niskiego pułapu, my z zerowego pułapu. Na temat co to jest, na przykład czy DPI, czy PMD jest bardziej groźne dla środowiska, 2% studentów 6. roku zna odpowiedź. Oni w ogóle nie wiedzą o tym, że leki mają ślad węglowy. Nie potrafią rozróżnić. Oni skończyli studia. English Division to samo, nie ma żadnej różnicy. Co ciekawe, polska młodzież miała większą świadomość proekologicznych niż azjatycka, arabska, która była grupą porównawczą. Wcale nie byli bardziej otwarci na ekologię jak polska młodzież, ale wiedza była taka sama. Nie wiedzą nic. Ja przeniosę się do wcześniejszych swoich badań przerażających, kiedy porównałem wiedzę na temat wpływu zanieczyszczeń powietrza na zdrowie i okazało się, że polscy pacjenci z chorobami płuc wiedzą więcej medycznie niż lekarze ich leczący pulmonolodzy. To było porażające. Ja publikowałem te dane, mi się nie chciało wierzyć. Dlaczego? Bo to jest wiedza ostatnich 20 lat. Średni wiek tych specjalistów jest pod 60 w Polsce, bo młodzi lekarze wyjechali za granicę, pracują ci, którzy się nie uczyli o tym. Nie mają czasu na odnawianie tej wiedzy. Więc my mamy bardzo poważny problem, ponieważ polska medycyna, nie we wszystkich krajach tak jest, ale nie ma czegoś takiego jak zdrowie publiczne, jak prewencja. Jest nastawiona nawet nie na diagnostykę, tylko na leczenie. W związku z tym, jak my mamy tylko leczyć skutki zanieczyszczeń powietrza, skutki klimatycznych zmian, to my będziemy mieli olbrzymi problem, ponieważ my tak naprawdę, ktoś powie edukacja. Nie, my nie mamy edukatorów. My powinniśmy zacząć od przygotowania kadry edukatorów, ponieważ mówienie o edukacji bez edukatora nie ma sensu. My dzisiaj nie jesteśmy w Polsce w stanie stworzyć edukacji. Jest kolejna sprawa, że ta edukacja im się potem nie będzie opłacać, bo nawet jak wyedukujemy tych edukatorów, to w Polsce lekarz zarabia dzisiaj bardzo dobrze, a edukator, nauczyciel, który ich będzie uczył, nie. W związku z tym nie opłaca się uczyć, opłaca się leczyć. W związku z tym znów medycyna naprawcza będzie dominować na to, o której mówimy. Czyli my nie będziemy zapobiegać, tylko leczyć, a na tym zarabiać będzie nieliczny personel medyczny, jaki w Polsce jest. Także mamy bardzo poważny problem. Ja nie znajduję łatwych rozwiązań dla środowiska medycznego, ponieważ bez kadry edukatorskiej, której musielibyśmy nie tylko ją wykształcić, ale umotywować, żeby oni chcieli się zająć edukacją. Potem ta edukacja przeniesiona do lekarzy powinna przynieść im efekt. Ona nie przynosi, bo leczenie przynosi, a prewencja nie. Lekarzom się opłaca leczyć, nie opłaca się zapobiegać. To jest też coś, co jest wyzwaniem państwowym, bo to musi władza się z tym uparać. Państwo. że w interesie państwa jest, żebyśmy nie mieli chorób, a nie żebyśmy je leczyli, bo to jest interes służby zdrowia. I służba zdrowia nie jest orędownikiem. Ja jestem tutaj troszkę nietypowym lekarzem, ponieważ ja mówię o zapobieganiu. A ktoś może powiedzieć, no ale my żyjemy z tego, że ludzie chorują, więc po co im zapobiegać? To jest oczywiście wywrócenie problemu do góry nogami, ale chcę uzmysłowić, że my musimy zacząć patrzeć na problem globalnie, bo my musimy patrzeć, co się społeczeństwu, co się państwu opłaca, a nie co jakimś małym grupom, którym się może okazać, że lekarz nie jest zainteresowany zapobieganiem, bo tak naprawdę jest zainteresowany leczeniem, czyli choroby mu nie przeszkadzają, to pacjentom przeszkadzają, płatnikom, którzy muszą zapłacić za to leczenie. Czyli my musimy rozszerzyć spektrum i nie będę w tej chwili mówił, myślę, że w dalszej części jeszcze podsumujemy, co należałoby zrobić. Ja tylko mówiłem punkt widzenia lekarskiego. Startujemy z zerowej wiedzy na temat śladu węglowego w medycynie. Polscy lekarze, polscy decydenci nie wiedzą nic o śladzie węglowym generowanym przez służbę zdrowia.
I think that's a tremendous contribution to our discussion. You have really pointed out the most fundamental issue with environmental and climate change, that is the education. And I've picked up from your speech two very important behavioral elements. It doesn't pay to learn, it pays to treat. It doesn't pay to prevent, it pays to treat. And I think this is the complete reversal of what truly sustainable healthcare systems should do. They should focus on prevention, they should focus on education, rather than the end result, the treatment of the patient who is already suffering from an environmentally inspired causes. And I think we have already started very deeply talking about environment, the air pollution, and we have this great contribution from Jose Luis and Professor Zielonka. But I think we should probably take maybe a touch of a step back, and we have an educator amongst us. So I would like to maybe ask you, Natalia Ciobanu, to maybe illuminate not just how environment as a part of the ESG interacts with healthcare, but how also the other aspects, the societal, the governance aspect, play a role, maybe a little bit more of an illumination of the entire phenomenon of all those dimensions.
Can you? Yeah, okay. Sure, thank you. It's a wonderful input that Professor has made on the education. And the bad news is that he's right. The good news is that, or maybe not so good, is that it's not limited only to the healthcare professionals. It is quite a common challenge to understand what the carbon footprint is and how it impacts. And it is a big systemic issue, indeed. And I think we need to be aware of that. But does anybody here dance tango? No, okay. So I've been in sustainability for about 20 years, and about 3 months ago I started learning tango. And the first thing that we learn for a good dancing experience is that the feet and the lower body needs to be well grounded, and the upper body needs to aim towards the sky, no? And all the while, the core needs to always be engaged, to always move, to be able to dance. So I would like to invite us to have also a similar perspective, because I think it's a wonderful metaphor, a similar perspective when we think about, okay, what we need to do, right? So we need to be very well anchored in the reality of where we stand, in the challenges. They are very real. And I must say that many times, very many times, it is quite demotivating as well when we see the amount and the depth of challenges that we face. But at the same time, we need to keep looking at the vision where we want to get, and always engage the core, always keep acting to reach there. Sometimes acting, and the basis of it is education, is continuing to speak about it, and it's a wonderful thing that we are speaking about it here at the Economic Forum. And sometimes it's about going into the very technical details of measuring the carbon footprint of a product, of a medical device, thinking of how we can reduce the footprint of that. And sometimes it's also about looking at our facilities overall, at the carbon footprint or the performance of the hospital, but not just the carbon footprint. So when we talk about ESG, there are two aspects that we need to keep in mind, big aspects, before even looking at what ESG is. The first one is the inside-out perspective. So how does our product, or how does our hospital or our healthcare facility or the ministry even impact the outside world, whether it's about carbon emissions or greenhouse gas emissions or the waste we're producing, or other impacts. How does the way that our staff operates, our doctors, our nurses, our researchers, impact the society? How do they engage with the society? And how does our transparency, when we come to the G now, how does the transparency of our activity impact the overall market dynamics? But also then there is the outside-in perspective. How are we impacted? How is the activity, the current and future activity of my facility, of my healthcare entity, is impacted by what's happening outside? And we talk about, yes, the worst case scenario when my hospital is located in a floodable area, right? And then there is this flood coming in and it's interrupting my activity. It's very immediate, no? But then there is also the broader thing, like the heat waves. Am I equipped enough to be able to deal with the increased patient intake when there are these extreme weather events? The societal, how does the labor law, how does the educational system, the way that it's organized, is impacting the skills of the people that I want to hire? And in terms of governance, how is the legislation impacting my activity? How are the current processes and procedures that are happening in my industry impacting my facility? So this is the first thing. Now, we always need to think in terms of outside in and inside out perspective. And when you look a little bit at the more detail, like what is E, what is S and G, and how do they work together within the entity, within the business or the facility, we can think of it as a patient, really, as a human body. No? The E is lungs, the liver, the kidneys. It's the metabolism, is what my facility, what my company is taking in and metabolizing and letting out, no? Energy, emissions, products we're consuming, waste we're generating. It's about that. The S is about the people. It's like, it's the heart at the end of the day. No, it's the heart that beats, that keeps the body alive and all the other organs fed with the blood, right? Supplied with the blood. So it's really, people are at the heart of any entity, of any business, of any activity. And it's about people, meaning the workforce within the entity, within the company, the hospital. It is about the workforce in the supply chain. It wouldn't help me if the workers, for example, of a key supplier of my supplies that I need to use are exploited in their activity and can cause interruptions, and then, right, I'm not able to conduct my own business. So it is also about the workforce in the supply chain. It is very much about the beneficiaries of my activity, the customers, if I'm a company, a producing company, the patients. It's about how they are impacted and how I am impacting them. And it is very much also about the communities where I operate. And the professor said very well, how can I engage in a conversation with the doctors and the patients on these topics if it's not part of the culture in the community where I operate? And again, an important point is, how do I impact the society? Am I engaging, am I educating as a hospital this or as a company this? So that they, in turn, are more educated. And the G is very much the brain. It's about the decisions I make. It's about how transparent I am. It's about the protocols, the processes, the controls that I have in place, the guidance and instructions about how all these things should operate. And it is about essentially directing the entire activity and bringing it all together without a guidance on how to collect the waste separately and how to manage the waste separately. I cannot actually manage it because I also need to do education, I need to do infrastructure to be able to collect the waste separately and then recycle or produce energy or not. So it is the brain. The G is the brain that directs the activity of everything else.
Thank you so much for this metaphor. I think it makes it so much clearer to be able to imagine how that system works. Clearly, healthcare permeates every aspect of life, societal, economic, humanistic, you name it. There's potentially another aspect of healthcare, the value-based healthcare, that is very much a mirror image of ESG, in that sense that we are trying to get the environment and society right. Therefore, we are looking of what matters to patients and those outcomes that are meaningful to patients. And on the other hand, we are integrating care, which is the governance part, which is trying to make care as sustainable, as linear as possible. So I think that those two concepts should always go hand in hand. I cannot imagine a value-based healthcare system without ESG, and conversely, ESG without a value-based health system. And I think that brings me to a next question to Agnieszka Schnick, because that value-based health system and ESG principles is something that has informed now for quite a few years one of your initiatives, which is the green hospitals. But you work also on other aspects of environmental impact and ESG. Maybe you can give us a little bit of almost a case study of what have been the successes, what have been the challenges, what is currently happening in your world and in your particular strategies.
Of course. I as well have to agree that healthcare sector is kind of difficult regarding the sustainability. There is not much awareness about the topic, although this is like the big dual role of the healthcare sector. Yes, it should like keep our health in a good shape and other have a great impact on our health. So that's why it's so important to raise this awareness. And since 2 years, we actually established Green Coalition for Health. This is a Polish initiative platform which try to gather different stakeholders from healthcare sector, but not only, also from, for example, from construction sector, from medical devices sector, to really bring the knowledge, experience change, and really implement the different sustainable solutions in the healthcare sector. And the truth is that the healthcare specialists, doctors, medical doctors, they don't know much about sustainability. Although the hospital directors, they are more aware at the moment, and actually at the moment we have more than 40 hospitals, public hospitals, private hospitals, which are members of our coalition. And also the directors of the hospitals see the benefit, the economic benefit as well, to implement different sustainable solutions in their premises, in the hospitals, especially regarding energy, for example, waste management, etc. So I see the light in the tunnel, let's say. So already, as I said, we try to also educate them, share the knowledge, and bring more stakeholders to the table to really make a change. And also maybe a kind of interesting example about these clinical doctors, because when you see anesthetic gases, for example, they have very huge impact and they have a very huge carbon emission, yes? And now in many hospitals over Europe, there is special movement to change them into the injection, which is not much change in the therapeutical result. And I recently talked to some Polish anesthesiologists, like the top of the Polish anesthesiologists, and I just tried to explain them. And he said, oh, yeah, actually you're right. I never thought about it. And it's so easy, actually, to make a change in the small area, but it is. And also one more last word, because you said about these educators that we need like the new, I don't know, position job as educators. I think we don't, because I see many examples in different hospitals also over Europe that there is voluntary employees of the hospitals. They organize themselves and they work as ambassadors. And for example, in one university clinical hospital in Amsterdam, for example, there is 60 sustainable teams, 60, which really make different projects and they raise awareness around, you know, different members of the hospital. So.
Thank you so much, Agnieszka. I think together with Natalia, you've really painted a picture of how both bottom-up but also top-down initiatives can truly drive the ESG within healthcare for the betterment of the patient, not as something mystifying or abstract. And I think that the example you've given to us about the gases from anesthesia, there's a great parallel. Of course, the gases from the inhalers is a huge contributor to carbon footprint. You've mentioned that when we look, for instance, as pharma into a product, we need to think in research and development already about the environmental aspect. So we're here at the behest of Kiesi, one of the very few companies that is fully investing the R&D into creating a green inhaler. So I think we have that sort of social responsibility on the side of pharma. But you've also mentioned, very importantly, other initiatives that are driven on the individual level of indication or disease specific. And that brings me to a patient. Because when we look at the initiatives that are ESG or climate oriented or sustainability oriented, in some countries like Netherlands, they are not driven by clinicians or policymakers. They are actually driven mostly by patients, and patients who are being listened and empowered to bring in solutions to hospitals. And I think that's potentially also a cultural shift that has already occurred in some countries in Europe. And by the way, in Czechia, we are seeing that shift already, and I'm sure David Kolář will be able to speak volumes about this. So it's not a divide between West and East, but that shift is extremely important. And that brings me to a question to Gergi. You are the patient voice. You work with patients with pulmonary fibrosis, with respiratory, extremely debilitating respiratory diseases. How do you see that involvement of patients in creating more sustainable healthcare systems? I've given a couple of examples from Western Europe, but maybe you can share other examples where either patients are involved and successful, or conversely, not involved enough, but should be.
I think. Hello?
Yes, it's working.
Oh, it's working. And thanks for having me in this panel and also for this interesting question, Thomas, because I think that there's an unquestionable role of patients on this, and we already experience in many initiatives that once it's coming from the patient and not from healthcare professionals or particularly from the industry, it has attracted much more attention from the patient end. I think it's unquestionable, and it's no need to say that how the fragile population of respiratory patients are exposed to heat waves, air quality. So to address this, however, there are many activities have been already conducted, but still many things ahead of us. ERS, the European Respiratory Society, with the help or assistance with the European Lung Foundation, which is a patient-driven organization, have built various pillars how we can address these problems. There are many ongoing public consultations within the EU regarding medical devices, the pharmaceutical regulations, and there's a possibility also to comment this from patient perspective. The European Lung Health Group, which is a formation of various stakeholders, more than 15 patient organizations, including EU PFF, is part of this, but we also have healthcare professionals as well as some support from the pharmaceutical companies. We usually provide position papers regarding these EU regulations. But if you ask from a very specific point of view from patients, that actually patient associations are really interested in going green. Some of these initiatives actually nicely harmonized with the global need of patients of being cured, of having better access to healthcare. If you are looking for very specific examples, I'm really happy to deliver some. So we learned from COVID that actually it's very easy to reach out our patients virtually. So many activities of the patient associations are going virtually, which is really decreasing the carbon footprint of how patient organizations are operating. On the other hand, there's also other initiatives how we try to decarbonize the healthcare system. For instance, we can also talk about that initiative which is coming from the European Reference Network for Respiratory Diseases. You might know that many rare disease patients are treated in expert centers, which are regional ones very far from their living address. And the ERL Lung initiative is about building up satellite system, which means that there might be huge expert centers in big cities, but not all these rare disease patients should be treated in these centers, but only the very complicated ones. So some regional hospitals might be nominated as satellite centers, so the patient should not travel 8 or 10 hours to visit an expert for a very small or even not invasive tests. And there was a very nice initiative also about this coming from Sweden, is that we try to build on telemedications and telemedicines from patient perspective. So for instance, in Sweden, they have a very useful and smart medical device, spirometry. So the patient should not go directly to the hospital to make this test, but the smart device is communicating with the hospital's system. So from home, the test can be easily made. I'm really happy that I have heard some examples from Professor on how the clinical trials can be decarbonized. Patient organizations, luckily, invited from the very first steps of clinical trials, especially from protocol reviews. And as a respiratory patient advocate, we usually see the inhalators. And that gives me a great idea on this, because we usually thinking about this as a medical device by effectiveness. So how the compound will be delivered to the lung. And it's nicely harmonized with the initiative of ERS when we are advocating for propellants which are not harmful to our air quality. But coming back to this medical device, we can easily have an opinion that, for instance, it is, you need to have the medical kit to deliver this medical device with you. And we just having the ergonomy of this medical device. But most recently, we ask why we need an additional charger for this, why we need an additional cable, why it cannot be charged by a simple USB cable. So, it's very step by step, but if you consider how many inhalators you have only in Europe, it might have, a kind of measurable impact on our environment. And last but not least, and I already referred to Professor's very nice contribution, is that despite I've participated in medical protocol reviews, we have never ever given a thought of how this clinical trial will impact our environment. To prepare for this discussion, I just asked Google whether there's any papers on this, and just realized that in 2023 there was a global paper which was actually assessing how the clinical trials can be decarbonized. And some global association asked their members, and the result was shocking. Half of the clinical trial spots have never even given thought of it. Half of them partially considered, but once it comes to action, it was only transferred to go to Zoom meetings except for in-person meetings. So I think that we have a lot of things to do. As I mentioned in the very first part of my talk, patients are the best tool for advocate for going green. We are the best ones who heard by decision makers and policy makers. And as we talk with Jose Luis, we can also bring a little bit sense of humanity as being part of a patient community and not only delivering very dry data which might be landed in the drawer. Many thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much. I think you've mentioned something extremely important that we haven't touched upon yet, that the entire life cycle of a medical technology doesn't start at the moment that it's available to patients. It starts years before with clinical trials. So I think that's a hugely important input on how patients and other stakeholders can truly limit it years before it has had any measurable impact. And also you mentioned, of course, how patients are not only contributing to that, but actually in line with what Professor Zielonka already said, patients are becoming the experts They are the better educated part of the stakeholders. I think that seamlessly will move me to a twofold question to David Kolář. In Czechia, whom I already referenced, there's a double system in that patients truly play a role in shaping policy. There's a patient council that truly shapes a policy, meaning any policy, including ESG, including environmental impact. And also, I know you are one of the very few countries where the industry has decided to come together and talk decarbonization and have an ESG group dedicated. Maybe you could touch upon both the patient role and its unique role in Czechia and how that contributes, and then maybe a little bit of the maybe takeaways from the working group within the industry.
Tomáš, thank you very much, and thank you for your invitation to this interesting panel. It's totally true. We are, as a Czech Republic, also, I would say, front runners in empowering the patient organizations and really trying to get them engaged in all important processes. We started in 2012 as an association, the Academy for Patient Organizations, because the idea was everybody is discussing about the healthcare topics, but we are missing the patients. And if we would like to include them in those discussions, we need to give them the chance to get the know-how, get the experience, because during that time it was mostly the patient itself or the families and others, and they were missing the information and knowledge about the system, how it works. So we established the academy, and after 10 years I can say that really patients in Czech Republic, they are strong part of all important discussions. They are even deciding about the reimbursement for the rare diseases, which is quite unique still in Europe. And I think we can be really proud of what we achieved together. And also Czech patient organizations are really strong ones, that their voice is really heard, and it's visible that it helped to bring the humanity, as you said, and also the sense, the real experience with the system for the discussions. Yeah. What is important, I think, from the industrial perspective, because I'm representing mainly the innovative industry, I think we are also the front runners, and I heard pretty nice projects from some of the European countries, but I would say the question for us is, industry is totally ready to be the one who is driving ESG and who is actively involved, but the question is if Europe is ready, because I don't see these examples in Czech Republic. Yeah, to be completely honest, if we are speaking about those topics with the government, there is zero interest to discuss it. I think if we can bring the topic as a green procurement or green HTA, they would be like, okay, and what? Yeah? Because it is everything driven mainly by the budgets, by the money itself, about the organization of the care in itself. And these elements are not included, but they are not even discussed yet. And that was the reason why we established the ESG platform. It was in Czech Republic mainly driven by Chiesi, because I still think that Chiesi is one of the unicorns, even amongst the innovative pharma companies, who is really going ahead to that topic. We collected what is currently being done on the level of the innovative companies, because a lot of that is really happening already. Maybe not everybody is aware that it is part of ESG, but let's say the industrial mission and what we are doing, even our business is core S in ESG, because we are bringing the innovative treatment to the patients. So we are part of ESG. And now we collected what is already happening in those companies active in Czech Republic. It's a lot of activities already there, mainly in that S part. And now we are thinking how to promote it and how to start the discussion with the government, because if you would like to really, and coming back to the Europe, if you would like to implement ESG broadly, we need to think about that in a complex way. Because, for example, last European legislations which are touching those areas, like Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive or General Pharma legislation, even Critical Medicines Act, they are bringing good ideas, but they are thinking only about that particular part they are covering. So if we are really bringing the new obligation for the innovative pharma companies and all pharma companies and the cosmetics companies to pay for the water management treatment, it's fine, okay, but we need to think about what is the impact on the companies, and if they are not pushed to cut another expenses or another investments they are doing, for example, in the ESG part, which is somehow still voluntary in those parts and not obligatory like it is. So I really think that you touch a really nice topic, and that's the education and also complex thinking about those things. And we are not missing it only on the level of the physicians, but also on the level of policymakers nationally, but also in Europe. And that's something we need to change, and we need more people speaking about that. I totally agree that patient organizations are the one who can be delivering these messages. But without that, we cannot change anything.
Thank you so much. And thank you for reminding us also about that ESG is a cross-stakeholder partnership. It cannot be just a domain that, say, industry is responsible for. This is not the solution. The solution is really the cohesive, holistic one. And I know we have limited time, so I'm going to slightly flip the order and return to José Luis Castro first. We have heard of so many aspects at the moment. And at a patient level, there are initiatives. Well, I'm going to touch upon all the green elements. So there's a green asthma patient initiative. Further down the line, there's a green HTA initiative. And further down the line in the life cycle, we have a green procurement. Would you perhaps be able to give us a little bit of a summary of how those initiatives at European, but also at local level, with your vast experience, not just of Europe, but globally, can truly contribute? Because they don't seem to be connected at present. But what connects them is the word green only at this stage.
Sure. I think if I hear all of our presentations here today, one of the biggest challenges is the lack of information about the impact of the healthcare system on the environment. And I think that beginning, first of all, in sharing that information and also in training physicians and ensuring that governments, for example, or even industry, include those into their procurement system, into their clinical trials, into their different activities, begins that road to a greener pathway to care. But I think it all begins with the information and what the impact is, to know exactly what the appropriate intervention is. There are, of course, initiatives on green procurement, such as in Sweden, net zero in Belgium, and I think also in the UK. I mean, these are all initiatives that have, they're proven initiatives that reduce the carbon footprint. But what is always important in understanding whether the initiative will have a positive impact is to understand what the problem that you're trying to solve is, and to have appropriate data and also an appropriate method of educating the users in the population on how this will be applied and how it will benefit them.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I'm very painfully aware that we only have a few minutes, so I would love each one of you maybe to issue a few recommendations. Starting with Professor Zielonka, you have spoken of educational needs, but if you were put in charge of ESG in Europe or in Poland, where do you see the solutions, either at local or global level?
Zacznę od tego, że ta sala jest pusta nie dlatego, że ten problem jest nieważny, tylko dlatego, że ta sala jest pusta, ten problem jest aż tak ważny. To jest dokładnie odwrotnie, ponieważ sesje, które organizuję dla lekarzy na temat wpływu zanieczyszczeń powietrza na zdrowie, pustkami świecą. I dlatego w Polsce mamy tak duży problem. Dlatego, że ta strona jest pusta i możemy o tym mówić i nie będzie długo efektu, póki się nie wypełnią sale, ale przez to będziemy mieli problem. Ja mówiłem o edukacji, ale ja jako nauczyciel mam świadomość ograniczeń edukacji. To jest tylko jeden z elementów. Dlatego ja powiem o tym, co interesariusze poszczególni mają zrobić. Tak, uniwersytety muszą zmienić program nauczania, unowocześniać go. Są zbyt konserwatywne. Nie wprowadziły elementów wiedzy, którą mamy o zanieczyszczeniach powietrza w ogóle. Nie wprowadziły zmian klimatycznych na zdrowie w ogóle. To są tylko lokalne, gdzieś tam przez poszczególnych lekarzy elementy, a nie element nauczania, który znajduje się w kurikulum. To jest zadanie uniwersytetów. Muszą przygotować kadrę i to jest oczywiste. Ale to jest tylko jeden z elementów. Lekarze muszą się kształcić. Lekarzom się przestaje kształcić, ponieważ jest tak duże zapotrzebowanie na ich pracę, że zanika problem ciągłej edukacji i nie ma systemu nadzoru. A to jest kolejny interesariusz, który ma nadzorować, czy leczenie jest zgodne nie tylko z zasadami sztuki, nie tylko opłacalne, ale czy jest dobre dla środowiska. Ten element również musi w nadzorze zaistnieć. Teraz firmy farmaceutyczne. Jedni mówią, przedłużmy termin obowiązywania poprawki z Kigali, od kiedy ona ma wejść w życie. Przecież ona jest już od 15 prawie lat, od 10 lat, od 10 lat obowiązuje. Jedni pracują nad nowymi, tu Kiezi padło, tak, oni ten czas wykorzystali do przygotowania nowego produktu, a inni czekają, że nam przedłużą, bo przecież nie wstrzymają leków. To jest świetny przykład, że wszyscy mają tu coś do zrobienia, przemysł farmaceutyczny też. Ja pamiętam, jak rozdzielano szaty, gdy był protokół montrealski w sprawie dziury ozonowej. Mówiono, zabiorą leki ratujące życie. Nic się takiego nie stało. Przemysł farmaceutyczny z powodu protokołu montrealskiego wynalazł leki proszkowe, notabene mniej emisyjne. I co się stało? Poprawiła się jakość leczenia, wymuszona środowiskowymi działaniami. Gdybyśmy tak samo wymusili teraz działania od firm, stworzenia przyjaznych dla środowiska, to jest zadanie z jednej strony dla firm. One wymyśliły nam proszkowe formy, są nowe propylenty. To nie wszystko. Pacjenci, musimy zmienić świadomość pacjentów. To nie jest tylko lekarz, który ma coś nakazać. Musi po drugiej stronie być przygotowany odbiorca. To jest zadanie mediów, szkoły. To jest zadanie organizacji pacjenckich, organizacji pozarządowych. Tu jest wielka robota. Szpital, proszę Państwa, przecież on nie jest rozliczany z tego, ile produkuje śladu węglowego. Nikt o tym nie rozmawia. W Wielkiej Brytanii tak, oczywiście. Tam to jest liczone bardzo dokładnie. Ale przeciętnie dyrektor jest rozliczany z tego, że oszczędnie leczy, diagnozuje, a nie z tego, że zmniejsza emisję. Powinno to być jego obowiązkiem i dorocznym wykazaniem, o ile zmniejszył. Czyli zwróćcie Państwo uwagę, wszyscy mają coś tu do zrobienia. To nie jest problem edukacji. Każdy interesariusz, który jest w służbie zdrowia, od pacjenta, lekarza, opinioliderów. WHO, chapeau bas, stworzyło nam pewne rekomendacje, ale takie muszą być lokalne, narodowe. Każdy ma coś do zrobienia.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for bringing up another important aspect of accountability to the fore. This is so hugely important. Regardless of how many stakeholders come together, if all of them are not accountable, then nothing moves forward. We are now moving to pretty much conclusion of our panel, starting with Natalia. 1 minute. What is the most important from your perspective? Or maybe there's a tremendous success story that you know of that you would like to tell us about, or your recommendation. It's probably going to be quite difficult to top Professor Zielonska, very comprehensive overview, but I'm sure we can hear a couple of other aspects and angles.
I will just probably focus on the starting point because all of them are important. But regardless if we are a company, and Casey knows this very well because they've done it, or a hospital or any entity, a starting point would be to take a step back and to look at to make an assessment. And we have guidance on that. The European Sustainability Reporting Standards has provided guidance on what we call a double materiality assessment, which is the starting point where we look at what is our value chain, who are my stakeholders, how am I impacting them, and nature is one of the stakeholders, the silent stakeholder, no? How is my activity impacting them, and how are they impacting me? And there it will be a plethora of impacts and risks and opportunities And we need to prioritize because we cannot deal with all demons at the same time, but we need to start with the ones that are the biggest ones and the ones that are easiest to access. One example from Romania is that, yes, energy consumption is a big deal. So what they're doing in pilot projects is they're trying to reduce energy consumption, the loss by energy efficiency strategies and projects, and increase the use of renewables. But it should not stop at that, of course. And the other thing from the private sectors, and that can be extended to the public sector very well, is publishing the sustainability reports, bringing more transparency for these entities, public hospitals, public institutions. Transparency will then drive action.
Thank you so much. Prioritization as part of any strategy, absolutely important. Agnieszka, 1 minute. I know it's a tough order to summarize anything in 1 minute, but perhaps some more insight from your end.
I think the most important thing is persistency and also the bottom-up approach. Yes, as we're doing here, these events like this are very important, and thank you very much for organizing that. Because in Poland, as I see other innovation pharmaceutical companies, they're not interested at all in the topic. Also, the chamber, the Chamber of Commerce, yes, of the pharmaceutical companies also, they not see the problem. So this bottom-up approach, it's very much important, and then we can maybe see top-down approach, because we need also the systemic change, the support from government. And in many countries, why in UK there is this big interest? Because I think NHS was the first institution, and the UK was the first country which prepared the road for the decarbonization of the healthcare sector. So that's why they are that much aware. In Poland, we hope maybe we will get there. Let's see.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. And I'm glad you mentioned that bottom-up sometimes is more important than top-down. The bottom-up causes the top-down.
I think at the moment this is the most important.
As is evidenced, for instance, by many patient initiatives in various countries that have then transformed into policies. And that is a perfect bridge to get your patient perspective, again, 1 minute of final recommendations and a summary of what truly matters.
Yeah, many thanks. I think that patient organizations have a critical role in ESG through their whole life cycle to raise awareness, the importance of this topic, and also stress to each and all stakeholders that it has a direct effect on respiratory patients' health.
Thank you so much. David, you've already offered a few words of wisdom from the industry perspective, but perhaps a little more.
Okay, so I will be also quite simple, because I think that industry is simple animal. So if we would like to go bottom up, I still agree this is a really good approach. If there are companies which are actively doing more than others, just don't be scared to promote them, to appreciate them, to give them slightly bigger reimbursement, to really just don't speak about the money now, but about the investment for the future, because everything we are investing now into better environment will be back in 10 years, maybe, okay, 15 years, okay, 3-4 political cycles, but anyway, we are the society and we should think about it in the long-term perspective.
Thank you so much, David. And the very last but not least, Jose Luis, if you can, in a very short way, summarize and issue maybe some recommendations. Since you live and breathe this topic, that's your mission globally. That's why, without any favoritism, I've left you for the end conclusion.
No, thank you.
Only one phrase. I forgot about one important thing that we need to promote by national health fund promotion, reimbursement, low emission solution treatment. It's very important.
Absolutely.
Sure. If I would say that ESG is not an add-on to health. It is the operating system, as Natalia said, of delivering health that is equitable, that is resilient, that is also sustainable. And by cutting pollution, by creating greener care pathways, and building climate-ready hospitals, Central and Eastern Europe can protect its people now and the future. Mm.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I just want to thank all the panelists for this tremendous tour de force throughout a very complex topic. I think we've only touched the surface. We can continue for hours, and I'm sure we will, probably in private networking discussions. Also, I wanted to say something slightly more optimistic. in no way that affects what Professor Zielonka said, that lack of people in this room confirms how important this issue is. But on the optimistic side, I've been told that in online, in the streaming, we have over 300 people, so maybe not all is lost. There are 300 people listening to us. Maybe that's where the bottom-up will happen, through the online participation. And I want to thank also all the audience. Now, unfortunately, we don't have time for specific questions from the audience, but I'm sure the panelists are here today and are available for individual discussions and individual advice. It's been a pleasure, and thank you so much. We will make the impact together.
Thank you very much. It was a very interesting panel. Thank you very much, especially that's your job. Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you very much, and we will see you, I hope. See you. Thank you. Good day.